On March 6, 1981, Klaus Grabowski was in a courtroom on trial for the murder of Anna Bachmeier. While the court session started like every normal proceeding, no one was prepared for the deadly plan the mother of the victim had for her daughter's killer. These are 8 serial killers who were killed on camera by their victims' parents.
In our hearts, forgive this clown who's touched our families, taken my child.
2002, Michael Madison was convicted for attempted rape and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Little did anyone know that releasing him was a big mistake, as he went to commit more brutal crimes that earned him the death penalty. Born back on October 15, 1977, in East Cleveland, Ohio, Michael Madison had a troubled upbringing that ultimately led to a life of crime. Raised by his mother, Diane Madison, he was subjected to abuse at the hands of his mother and her boyfriends, which reportedly left lasting psychological scars. Michael struggled to establish a stable life and became entangled in criminal behavior early on, accumulating charges over the years. In 2000, Michael was convicted on drug charges, followed by another drug conviction in 2001. Then, just the next year, he was convicted of attempted rape, leading to a 4-year prison sentence and classification as a sex offender. However, these early crimes were like child's play compared to the disturbing events that would later unfold. After his release, Michael continued to drift without significant rehabilitation, culminating in the series of violent crimes for which he became infamous. In 2012, Michael started his sequence of murders, which spanned 9 months. In 2013, 3 women named Shatisha Shealy, Angela Deskins, and Sherelda Terry went missing. Michael's connection to these disappearances was later revealed in July 2013. When police responded to reports of a foul odor coming from a garage he rented. Inside, they discovered the decomposing body of a woman wrapped in plastic. The following day, authorities found 2 additional bodies, one in a nearby backyard and another in the basement of a vacant house. All 3 bodies were located within a 200-yard radius of Michael's apartment. On July 19, 2013, police searched Michael's residence, finding further evidence of decomposition. Michael was taken into custody after a brief standoff at his mother's home. He was subsequently charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, and his bail was set at $6 million. Michael was formally indicted on those charges that included multiple counts of aggravated murder, kidnapping, gross abuse of a corpse, rape, and illegal weapon possession. In the lead-up to his trial, Michael's defense team entered a not guilty plea, despite prosecutors seeking the death penalty. April 4, 2016 marked the beginning of his trial. During the proceedings, prosecutors argued that Michael's crimes justified the death penalty, citing the deliberate nature of the killings and the brutality with which they were carried out. On the other hand, his defense stated that his abusive upbringing and chaotic childhood had influenced his later behavior. However, the jury would take less than a day to deliberate, finding Michael guilty on all 13 counts on May 5, 2016. The sentencing phase of the trial began shortly thereafter, with the jury recommending the death penalty. On June 2, 2016, Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Judge Nancy R. McDonnell officially sentenced Michael to death.
You went on to abuse the corpses of these 3 victims. You stripped them from the waist down. You folded them in half.
However, Michael's reaction during the sentencing was a remorseless smirk as he rocked back and forth in his chair, igniting a powerful response from Van Terry, the father of Sherelda Terry, one of Madison's victims. Van Terry, who had approached the podium to address the court to speak on the impact his daughter's loss had on his family, would pause mid-speech and turn to look at Michael in anger. Then, without warning, he lunged toward him. The courtroom momentarily erupted into chaos as deputies restrained Terry, who was eventually escorted out without facing any charges. Madison was, however, uninjured, and Judge McDonnell continued with the proceedings after everything returned to normal. Despite the emotional outburst during his sentencing, the court upheld Michael's death penalty verdict. In 2020, the Ohio Supreme Court confirmed the sentence, moving Michael one step closer to his scheduled execution date. though a stay was granted until all appeals could be exhausted. And well, even though Terry couldn't kill his daughter's murderer, at least he has the consolation that Michael was sentenced to death. As emotional as this attack was, it doesn't come close to what was to a man considered to be the most protected gangster in a small Indian community. August 2002, Aku Yadav, who was a feared Indian gangster, raped a girl and thought he would get away with it like he always did. Well, this would be the last time Yadav ever terrorized anyone, as the women in the community rose up in retaliation. Bharat Kalicharan, widely known as Aku Yadav, terrorized the Kasturba Nagar slum in Nagpur, Maharashtra, for over a decade. Born in 1971, Yadav grew up in a poor neighborhood, which was filled with crime and home to two rival gangs. So by the early 1990s, Yadav had become one of the most feared figures, leading a gang responsible for serial rape, extortion, serial murder, and torture. Yadav's reign of terror began in 1991 with a gang rape, marking the start of 13 years of unchecked violence. He and his associates targeted women and girls, using rape as a weapon to intimidate and punish those who resisted his demands. His victims numbered over 40 women and girls from 300 families belonging to the community at the time. In fact, residents of the slum claimed that a rape victim lived in every other house. But that's not all. Yadav also extorted money, invaded homes, and murdered at least 3 people. But despite numerous complaints, the police had turned a blind eye to his crimes, as Yadav regularly bribed officers with cash and alcohol. This would allow him to operate with confidence, exploiting the vulnerabilities of the predominantly Dalit community, who face systemic caste discrimination and neglect from authorities. In August 2004, Yadav raped a girl and attempted to extort money from another victim. When a 25-year-old woman named Usha Narayani reported his actions to the police, he retaliated by threatening to throw acid on her and gang rape her. However, Narayani resisted, even threatening to blow herself up and her attackers using her home's gas supply. Her defiance would inspire the whole community to rise up against Yadav. Hundreds of residents armed with rocks and sticks attacked him and his gang, ultimately leading to his submission. So, fearing for his life, Yadav surrendered to the police on August 7, 2004, seeking their protection. Now, following his surrender, Yadav was charged and taken into police custody. However, his detention did little to ease the fears of Kasturba Nagar's residents, who believed that Yadav's history of bribing law enforcement would secure his release. In fact, on August 8, 2004, he narrowly survived an attack while being escorted to court. By August 13, 2004, Yadav had appeared before Nagpur District Court. His arrival was met with anger and anticipation, as nearly 200 women from the slum gathered to witness the proceedings. So confident of his acquittal, Yadav taunted his victims, calling one woman a prostitute. This provocation proved to be the breaking point. As tensions escalated, one of Yadav's victims removed her sandal and struck him, shouting that they could not live together. Her actions triggered a spontaneous reaction amongst the women present. These women were either victims themselves or parents to Yadav's victims. Overpowering the guards and officials, they threw chili powder in Yadav's face, rendering him defenseless. It was almost as if these women had planned it, as they were armed with their kitchen knives and other makeshift weapons. And with these, they would attack Yadav and stab him at least 70 times. They wouldn't stop though. They would also mutilate his body, cutting off his penis before killing him in a gruesome act of vengeance. Now, interestingly, the women involved made no attempts to flee the scene and collectively claimed responsibility for the killing. In fact, hundreds of residents, including those who weren't present at the courthouse, supported the women and even confessed to the murder. Initially, several women were arrested for that murder. However, public outcry and mounting support for the women's actions, including from a retired high court judge, led to their eventual acquittal. The judge stated that the women had been left with no alternative due to the police's consistent failure to protect them. And while a lot of people agreed with the vigilante justice carried out by these women, A lot more supported what the mother of this next victim did to her child's killer.
Es war am 3. Verhandlungstag, dass ich auf dem Flur hörte, er wollte eine Aussage machen. Ich habe gedacht, so, jetzt hat er sich die neue Konstruktion gemacht, wieder eine Lüge, was das Kind gemacht hat, was nicht gemacht hat. Und da ging es bei mir irgendwie nur noch, dieser Mund ist, also über meine Tochter wird nicht noch einmal öffentlich hergezogen.
May 5th, 1980. Anna Bachmeier had an argument with her mother and went to her neighbor's house to play instead of going to school. Unknown to anyone, that said neighbor was a man with a criminal history that ultimately led to his death in a courtroom shortly after. Born in 1994, Klaus Grabowski was a butcher with a dark past. In the 1970s, he was convicted of sexually offending 2 girls. And in 1976, he voluntarily underwent chemical castration. However, his criminal inclinations wouldn't stop there. Despite his castration, Grabowski sought hormone treatment to reverse the procedure, effectively restoring his libido. By May 5, 1980, Grabowski's criminal behavior escalated when he abducted Anna Bachmeier, the daughter of his neighbor, Mary Ann Bachmeier. According to reports, Anna had a disagreement with her mother, leaving her upset and desiring to meet a friend. Consequently, she would decide to skip school that day. And so, pretending to head to school, Anna left her home. However, she was enticed into an apartment by her neighbor, who was none other than Klaus Grabowski, with a promise that she would get all the chance in the world to play with his cats. Grabowski used this opportunity to hold Anna captive in his home, where he sexually assaulted her. Then he strangled her with a pair of his fiance's tights, killing Anna. He subsequently packed her body into a box and discarded it near a canal. However, his fiancée, horrified by his actions, turned him into the police. When questioned, Grabowski claimed that Anna blackmailed him to tell her mother about the abuse, and out of fear of returning to prison, he decided to kill her. At the time of his arrest, Klaus Grabowski's past as a convicted sex offender was well known. His earlier crimes, combined with his attempt to reverse his castration, made his actions particularly heinous in the eyes of the public. He was soon brought to trial for the murder of Anna Bachmeier, and it was during this trial that the story took a shocking turn. The trial of Klaus Grabowski began in early 1981. Mary Ann Bachmeier, Anna's mother, attended the proceedings with the burden of grief and anger weighing heavily on her. As the trial progressed, Bachmeier's emotions became increasingly difficult to control. March 6, 1981, during the 3rd day of the trial, Mary Ann Bachmeier made the decision to take justice into her own hands. Bachmeier smuggled a Beretta 70 pistol into the courtroom, and when the opportunity presented itself, pulled the gun and aimed it at Grabowski's back. She then fired 7 times, hitting Grabowski with 6 of those shots. He collapsed almost immediately and was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, interestingly, Bachmeier didn't attempt to escape and was promptly arrested without resistance. The courtroom, once filled with the formalities of the trial, erupted into chaos. Bachmeier's act of vigilantism, as it became known, would quickly capture the attention of the media and public, sparking a widespread debate about justice, morality, and the boundaries of the law. Mary Ann Bachmeier's actions led to charges of murder, though the prosecution later dropped the murder charge. March 2, 1983, after a lengthy trial, the court convicted Bachmeier of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a firearm. The defense successfully argued that the shooting had not been premeditated, and Bachmeier's sentence was set at 6 years in prison. However, she was released on probation after serving just 3 years. The consequences of Bachmeier's actions didn't end with her sentence. Her decision to shoot Klaus Grabowski changed the course of her life, and after her release from prison, she moved abroad, marrying a teacher and relocating to Lagos, Nigeria. The couple later divorced, and Bachmeier moved to Sicily, where she would work as an aide in a hospice. On September 17, 1996, Bachmeier passed away after she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer the year before. She is now buried next to her daughter Anna in Bergtor Cemetery, Lübeck. Now, if you think Mary Ann Bachmeier's actions were extreme, wait until you hear what comes next. August 2019. Lindy Jones was accused of murdering 18-year-old Willie Antoine Fields. Now, this tragic event set off a chain of legal proceedings that would lead to a high-profile court hearing and an intense emotional outburst from the victim's father. Lindy Jones grew up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, where his childhood appeared typical to outsiders. However, his teenage years were marked by escalating issues with the law, which culminated in a violent crime that would shock the community. August 1st, 2019, Willie Fields was reported missing by a family member after he was last seen leaving his job at a Chick-fil-A in Orangeburg. Concerned family would search tirelessly, with Fields' mother later finding his vehicle abandoned off Rosewood Drive. Law enforcement soon discovered blood inside the car and later, following an extensive search, found Fields' body in a wooded area nearby. Investigators had a lead, which led them to 22-year-old Lindy Jones, who was then accused of shooting Fields multiple times. But that's not all. It was also revealed that his brother, Delian Jones, had assisted him in disposing of the body. Lindy Jones was arrested and confessed to the crime, leading to his charge for murder, while his brother faced charges as an accessory after the fact. Prosecutors had a strong case with forensic evidence linking Jones to the crime, and his confession further corroborating the sequence of events. Jones' guilty plea spared the victim's family the trauma of a prolonged trial, but emotions remained high as sentencing approached. July 14, 2022. The courtroom hearing brought both families together under somber circumstances. During the proceedings, the victim's parents were given the opportunity to address the court. Angela Fields, the mother of the slain teenager, expressed her profound grief over the loss of her only child, as she struggled to maintain her composure, describing the void left in her life. Her husband, Willie Clay Fields, stood beside her in support. It was an emotionally charged moment, with Willie Clay turning towards Jones, who was shackled and standing at the defense table. But suddenly, Fields lunged forward, crossing the space between them and landing a punch to the side of Jones's head. Jones dropped to the ground and Fields went on punching him several more times before deputies intervened. Jones, who was still shackled, struggled to his feet and shouted threats back at Fields as he was led away. This intense incident briefly halted the court proceedings. After all was restored, the judge addressed Fields, stating that he would be held in contempt of court for his actions and advised him to secure legal representation. Now, Fields was later charged with third-degree assault and battery. But his attorney, Justin Bamberg, released a statement on behalf of Fields, expressing deep remorse for the outburst and pain that had pushed Fields beyond his limits. Bamberg appealed for understanding from the public, highlighting that Fields had endured immense grief and loss, coupled with the fact that he had lost his only son to senseless violence. Jones, on the other hand, maintained a defiant stance in court following the altercation, and in the end, Lindy Jones would be ultimately sentenced to life in prison. This attack by Willie Clay Fields was undoubtedly violent, but what was done by the parent of this next victim was particularly disturbing. February 2011. Tristan Laro was in court for his sentencing hearing after he was arrested for his wife's murder. Now, what happened during court proceedings was so shocking, it would make anyone speechless. On August 23, 2009, Cedar Police received a 911 call from a neighbor who reported screams and multiple gunshots coming from an apartment. When officers arrived, they found Misty Laro, a 19-year-old newlywed, dead on the bathroom floor, with 5 gunshot wounds to her head. There was a cigarette in her hand, and a lighter was found nearby. Her husband, Tristan Laro, who was initially at the scene, attempted to flee and led police on a brief foot chase before he was apprehended. Afterwards, he claimed that Misty had become distressed and had taken a handgun out from under a pillow, intending to harm herself. Laro also said that he attempted to wrestle the gun away, which led to multiple shots being fired. However, authorities didn't find his account credible, given the extent and placement of the gunshot wounds. During the preliminary hearings, the tragic circumstances and the autopsy report painted a picture of deliberate violence rather than a chaotic struggle. Initially facing multiple charges, he eventually pled guilty to first-degree murder. In exchange for his guilty plea, additional charges, including possession of a firearm by a restricted person and failure to stop for police, were dismissed. Lamoureux's decision to plead guilty also averted a lengthy trial, but did little to lessen the grief of Misty's family. February 2011, the sentencing hearing for Tristan Laro was held in Cedar City's 5th District Court. It was a very tense moment for Misty's family, especially for her brother, Jason Wilson. Devastated by the loss of his sister, Wilson took the stand to express how the murder had shattered his family. He struggled to contain his emotions as he addressed Lamoureux directly, who didn't show any remorse, as he rocked back and forth on his chair. As he spoke, Wilson's emotions intensified and began to move toward Lamoureux, who was seated nearby in shackles and surrounded by court officers. Unable to hold back his grief and anger, Wilson suddenly rushed toward Lamoureux, attempting to strike him. Court security responded swiftly, intervening before any significant harm could occur. Now, Wilson and Lamoureux were both restrained, with Wilson subsequently removed from the courtroom. In the aftermath, Wilson expressed regret for his actions, apologizing to the court for the outburst, but the emotional toll on him and his family was evident. So following the incident, Iron County Attorney Scott Garrett confirmed that Wilson would face a charge of disorderly conduct, a Class A misdemeanor. Garrett explained that while emotions were understandably high, maintaining order in the courtroom was essential for the safety and dignity of all parties involved. Garrett also noted that the courtroom officers had anticipated Wilson's emotional reaction and had positioned themselves accordingly, sensing the potential for an incident. Judge G. Michael Westfall, presiding over the case, proceeded with Lamoureux's sentencing after Wilson was escorted out. He sentenced him to 15 to life in prison for the murder of Misty Lamoureux. Now, Tristan had shown little remorse or even emotion during his proceedings and would decline to make any statement before the sentence was read. His defense attorney, Brian Jackson, noted that Lamoureux was struggling with accepting responsibility, often appearing defensive and detached when reflecting on his actions. While Lamoureux was unrepentant, the case of this next person will also leave you shocked.
The man convicted of murdering his 16-year-old ex-girlfriend was formally sentenced today.
Frank Delian Jr. accepted a plea deal to serve 45 years in prison.
January 2022, Frank Delian shot his ex-girlfriend, Diamond Alvarez, 22 times after agreeing to meet with her in a park. This tragic incident eventually led to more violent retaliations that forever changed the lives of two families. Frank Delian Jr. grew up in Houston, Texas, where he led an unassuming early life. At the time, Delian and Alvarez were in this volatile relationship, with Alvarez recently learning of Delian's involvement with another girl. Alvarez agreed to meet him that night at a park in their neighborhood, hoping to confront him about the betrayal. But that evening, Delian arrived at the meeting place and, during a confrontation with Alvarez, he fired 22 rounds into her. Alvarez, who had been out with her dog, was found by her mother, Ana Machado, after the dog returned home alone. Machado discovered her daughter's lifeless body in an open green space near their home and attempted CPR, but it was too late. Alvarez's murder was a shock to the community, and a memorial was quickly established at the spot where she was found. The motive for this murder was believed to be a mix of anger and jealousy, fueled by Alvarez's confrontation with Delian over his infidelity. Following this horrific act, Delian initially evaded immediate capture, but days later he was arrested and charged with the murder of Alvarez. He was, however, released on a $250,000 bond and was placed on house arrest, though his compliance with bond conditions proved short-lived. In the subsequent months, Delian violated the terms of his bond, prompting authorities to re-arrest him. Delian's trial was scheduled to begin on a Monday in early 2023. However, he failed to appear in court, with his attorney citing a car accident on his way to the courthouse, which required hospital treatment. Consequently, an arrest warrant was issued, and Delian was taken into custody from the hospital. When he finally appeared in court the following day, his defense attorneys announced that Delian had accepted a plea deal, agreeing to 45 years in prison in exchange for pleading guilty to the murder charge. This agreement meant that he would serve at least half of his sentence before becoming eligible for parole. Now, the courtroom proceedings on that day of the plea deal took an unexpected turn during the victim impact statements. Ana Machado, Alvarez's mother, addressed Delian directly, calling him a monster, and accused his family of raising him without a sense of accountability or empathy. As she concluded her statement, she began to approach Delian, visibly emotional. Simultaneously, another family member, believed to be a relative of Alvarez, moved aggressively toward him. Thankfully, deputies and court officers who seemed to have expected such a move acted quickly and restrained both Machado and the relative before any physical contact could have been made. The courtroom then descended into chaos as tensions rose. In the ensuing commotion, an unknown man, thought to be another member of Alvarez's family, rushed at Delian and managed to initiate physical contact before officers tackled him to the ground. The fight lasted for several minutes as other relatives from both families would join in, before officers were actually able to restore order and remove him from the courtroom. The hearing was temporarily halted, and the judge decided to clear the courtroom entirely. So following this incident, Machado expressed regret, apologizing publicly for the disruption. She explained that her actions were born out of profound grief and frustration, more specifically when she thought Delian was smirking as she spoke about her daughter. Now, due to the outburst, security for subsequent hearings was heightened, and family members from both sides were restricted from the courtroom during the formal sentencing.
It is wrong of me. That was wrong of us because we're not monsters. But it's so much hate because I want my daughter back.
2 days later, Delian was sentenced formally to the agreed-upon 45 years. His plea deal prohibited him from appealing the conviction and ensured that he would remain incarcerated for at least 2 decades. And this time, Delian was composed and didn't make a statement during sentencing. But we're not done yet if you thought that was the worst case. Wait until you hear this next one.
We never go in no neighborhoods and take people out. Don't do it!
June 2021. Peyton Gendron was investigated by the police for making murder-suicide threats in an online assignment for his economics class. Although he was released and received counseling, Gendron went on to bring everyone's worst fears to reality. Peyton S. Gendron, born and raised in Conklin, New York, appeared to have a relatively unremarkable upbringing. His parents were civil engineers, and his neighbors described him as a quiet individual. He attended Susquehanna Valley High School, where his behavior began raising red flags. First, his classmates noticed that Gendron rarely attended in-person classes and exhibited peculiar habits like wearing a hazmat suit to school during the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, in June 2021, he would make a threatening statement about committing murder and suicide, which led to an investigation by law enforcement. A few months earlier, though, he was sent to a hospital for psychiatric evaluation after he stated in an online assignment for his economics class that he wished to commit a murder-suicide when he retired. Now, although he was briefly evaluated and released, no further action was taken. We don't know why. Gendron later enrolled into SUNY Broome Community College in an engineering science program. But those troubling tendencies persisted. It was at this point that his friends and acquaintances noticed that he became increasingly withdrawn, spending way too much time online. His online activities would prove to be a key factor in his radicalization. Immersed in this far-right propaganda, Gendron adopted white supremacist ideologies, including the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which claims an orchestrated effort to replace white populations through immigration and demographic shifts. Now, unfortunately, those beliefs made him make a decision to commit a mass murder that targeted black individuals specifically. Gendron meticulously planned his attack over several months, researching previous hate crimes and carrying out preliminary survey trips to Buffalo. It was on these trips that he selected the Tops Friendly Markets supermarket in the city's East Side neighborhood because of its predominantly black clientele after traveling over 200 miles from his hometown to execute that plan. May 14, 2022, at approximately 2:30 p.m., Gendron arrived at this supermarket armed with a Bushmaster XM15 rifle modified for high-capacity mags, a hunting rifle, and a shotgun. Dressed in body armor and equipped with a helmet-mounted camera, he began live streaming the attack on Twitch. That live stream would last 2 minutes before it was shut down by Twitch services. He shot 4 people in the parking lot, killing 3, before entering the store and shooting 8 more individuals, 6 of whom died. The victims ranged in age from 32 to 86, including a church deacon, a grandmother of 9, and a grocery store security guard. The latter, Aaron Salter Jr., a retired Buffalo police lieutenant, confronted Gendron and fired at him, but the bullet failed to penetrate Gendron's body armor. Gendron returned fire, killing Salter instantly. In fact, at one point, Gendron reportedly apologized to a white individual and spared their life, underscoring the racial motivation behind this attack. Now, thankfully, Buffalo police responded as quick as they could, getting to the scene within minutes. However, by that time, he'd already shot 13 people, 11 of them being black and 2 white, out of which 10 of them, all black, died. By 2:36 p.m., officers had cornered Gendron inside the store. Initially, he pointed the weapon at his own neck, but was persuaded to drop it and surrender without further incident. Investigators later discovered a 180-page manifesto written by Gendron, outlining his racist motivations and desire to incite further violence. He described his actions as an effort to preserve white dominance in the United States. Interestingly, the investigations that came after Gendron's arrest revealed the extent of his planning and intent. You see, aside from the survey he carried out at the supermarket weeks before the shooting, Gendron also left ammunition with a friend under false pretenses. Investigators also found evidence of his extensive research into other racially motivated attacks, just demonstrating the premeditated nature of his crime. May 19, 2022, Gendron was formally charged with first-degree murder, to which he initially pleaded not guilty. In November 2022, Gendron changed his plea to guilty on all state charges, including murder, domestic terrorism, and hate crimes. That decision ensured he would face 11 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 3 months later, during his sentencing hearing, relatives of the victims were given an opportunity to address the court and Gendron directly. However, the emotional proceedings were briefly interrupted when a man in the audience, believed to be related to one of the victims, charged at Gendron. Court officers quickly restrained the individual, who was subsequently removed from the courtroom. When the court session resumed, Gendron tendered an apology to the families of his victims.
I'm very sorry for stealing the lives of your loved ones. I cannot express how much I regret all the decisions I made leading up to my actions on May 14th. I did a terrible thing that day.
Gendron's case remains significant not only for its devastating impact, but also for the broader implications. While his state sentencing guaranteed life imprisonment, he still faces federal hate crime charges, which could lead to a death penalty trial. In addition to that, the attack had also started debates about the role of online platforms in facilitating radicalization, as Gendron admitted to being heavily influenced by content on websites like Reddit and YouTube. A New York state judge would later rule that these platforms could face lawsuits for their alleged role in enabling Gendron's radicalization. And as disturbing as that case was, it is nothing compared to what happened to the next person on this list.
A husband and wife were arguing because she wanted him to keep his promise not to smoke. That led to a physical assault and hours later, gunshots.
Welcome to May 2019. Vashon Flowers and his wife, Jamie Thomas Flowers, had a heated argument. Little did anyone know that this would lead to a long criminal case with Vashon fighting for his life. Born in the mid-1970s, Vashon Flowers, who was a resident of Muskegon Heights, had a long history of criminal activity, including convictions for weapons possession, drug offenses, and assault. However, while he seemed like a changed person to his wife, Jamie Thomas Flowers, Vashon was merely a ticking time bomb. May 18, 2019, Vashon and his wife argued continuously, allegedly triggered by Jamie's objection to Vashon smoking again. The altercation then escalated into a physical violent act when Vashon pulled Jamie off a bed by her ankle and began choking her. This incident prompted Jamie to declare that their marriage was over afterwards. So Vashon responded by slashing her car's tires to prevent her from leaving. Now, police were called, but Vashon left the home that evening. However, the next morning, on May 19th, he returned with deadly intent. At approximately 6:30 in the morning, Vashon kicks the front door of that home in. His stepdaughter, Paris Jones, was hiding in a bedroom with her son when she heard Jamie pleading for her life. And moments later, 4 gunshots rang out. When Jones finally determined the coast was clear, she discovered her mother slumped against the wall in the laundry room, with 4 gunshot wounds to the torso. Although Vashon had fled the scene, he did turn himself in to Muskegon police 15 hours later, saying he had heard they were looking for him. Vashon was arrested and charged with open murder, which included first-degree, second-degree, and manslaughter charges. And as a 4-time habitual offender, Vashon's past crimes added to the gravity of those charges. The trial proceedings began in early 2020, and the prosecution's case relied heavily on eyewitness testimony from Paris Jones, who recounted the events leading up to the murder.
He was irritable and said that he was a grown man. If he wanted to buy cigarettes, he would buy cigarettes. And he got down on the ground and started choking my mother. Actually, I heard, "You don't have to do this, Vashon. Please don't do this. You don't have to do this." And then I heard gunshots.
Audio recordings of her 911 call, capturing Jamie's pleas and the gunshots, were also played in court, adding strong evidence against Vashon. June 3rd, 2019. The trial takes a dramatic turn during a preliminary hearing when Jamie's son, London Thomas, attempted to attack Flowers in the courtroom. Vashon, seated in the jury box speaking with his public defender, was the target of Thomas's sudden outburst. Surveillance footage showed Thomas leaping from his seat, jumping the courtroom barrier, and rushing toward Vashon. However, before Thomas could reach him, law enforcement officers intervened by wrestling him to the ground. A scuffle ensued as Thomas resisted, desperately trying to get closer to his mother's killer. The courtroom was immediately cleared to restore order, and Vashon was removed for his safety. The next day, Thomas was charged with civil contempt of court. But that's not all. Muskegon County District Judge Raymond Kostreva barred him from attending any further proceedings related to Vashon's case. However, Thomas, who was visibly emotional during the incident, received widespread sympathy from observers who understood his frustration and grief. On January 17, 2020, a jury convicted Vashon of first-degree premeditated murder, and 3 months later, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Interestingly, Vashon didn't testify during the trial and maintained his innocence, stating that he planned to appeal the conviction.